feature presentation.
Two
Norm.
guys in their media walls.
Exactly. It's a battle of the media walls, and obviously, you are the winner in
I
this
will
case.
probably win.
Yes. Now, to be fair, I will give myself some credit. I do have another wall behind this wall, so but I think you've been doing this obviously a lot longer when it comes to collecting media. And having that Jaws laser disc, I am so jealous because that's like one of those ones that you have to have.
This is what happens when you cover home video as long as I have, right? Like you just accumulate. I still have about probably 150 laser discs, some Criterion stuff that never got repressed, a few box sets that I've hung on to just because I want them. And then, Jaws, I can't give it up. It's just,
no. Well, it has a story.
It's a part of my
there.
history.
There's a story there, and we'll get into that. But there's nobody else I could think to have on this episode to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Jaws than you, Norm Wilner, because you truly are not only a fan of film, but like this movie in particular, I think means quite a bit to you. And I wanted to start by asking you your origin story when it comes to watching this for the first time and what your initial reaction was to Jaws.
Yeah, my history with Jaws is a weird one because I didn't see the whole movie for a few years. My parents divorced in 1978, and my dad had us on weekends in a little apartment at York Mills and Leslie. And my brother and I would go and watch, because we were, 10 and 8, we would go over, when we stayed over, we would watch the handful of Betamax tapes that he had. And there were a few, but not too many, but they were the same ones. And I don't know how he got them, but they were bootlegs for the most part. Like he had a widescreen copy of Superman the movie, which we watched until it fell apart. And one of the tapes he had was Jaws, which he had recorded himself. It wasn't a bootleg. He had recorded it from, I think it was ABC, the first network broadcast of it. So it was PG. It was safe. The really bloody stuff had been very elegantly trimmed. Yeah. Very, very well done though. And he had told us that on the old rotary counter on the Betamax, because this is way before on-screen displays, you could only watch it from 675 on. And 675 is when the orca leaves port to go deal with the shark. So my entire experience of Jaws, and we watched it a lot, was the last hour. So none of the stuff on land, none of the Amity political stuff, none of the city council, I don't even think we get to see Ellen Brody in that second hour. After they get on the boat, it's just those three men and the shark. And it was great. I mean, it was
Bruce and the boys.
Yeah, pretty much. And if you're watching that as a 10-year-old, it's thrilling. The music is like, that's when John Williams' score turns into an adventure movie, and the cutting, and even in pan and scan, and it was in pan and scan, it was terrific. And then I got to see the whole movie, and my head exploded. I must have been 13 or 14 when the VHS tape, the first one, got into my hands, and that was the original Universal MCA release, which was absolute garbage. I don't know if you're young enough that you probably never saw it this way, but it was the scope frame telecined, but not panned and scanned. It was the camera pointed dead center at an anamorphic image with no regard for any of it, for any of the compositions. The shot of Hooper and Brody arguing with Vaughn on the beach, those proportions are correct with the billboard behind them. It's sometimes Roy Scheider's nose, but mostly it's the billboard.
And that's it.
That's pretty much it. And it's a static shot.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because I think maybe I used to say that when I was a kid, and this is true, I would go see Back to the Future every week in the summer of 1985 because $2 Tuesdays made it possible to just go see it. And I would always find someone who hadn't seen it and go with them. And that was my film school, watching a movie work an audience, experiencing, like having enough time where you stop being thrilled by stuff, and you can appreciate the way it's put together, because that is a machine-tooled film. And then reading that script and finding out how completely different it was when they started out to do it, and all the other changes that Zemeckis and Gale had to make the movie. That's an education. But watching Jaws in various bastardized forms, panned and scanned, but only the second half, and then the whole movie, but only the middle third, and the way that forces you to imagine what else is there, to build in the rest of the frame, or to figure out what the dynamics are between Hooper and Quint on the boat by the time we meet them. Like, these guys, they're not friends, but obviously they're all working together. And then you find out later that, oh no, Brody brought him along because it was his charter, and they hate each other. And then finding out that was built out of the character work that the actors and Carl Gottlieb and Spielberg did when the shark wasn't working, and they had to figure out how to shoot a movie without the monster for the first hour of the picture, and then also spend months shut down and work on the characters. This is what I say all the time. Jaws is the greatest accident in the history of cinema. If one thing had gone right, the movie wouldn't be a masterpiece. It would probably still be pretty great, but it wouldn't be remembered the way it is. And finding that out and sort of retrofitting all of my experiences of the movie into what it was in 1975, when I was too young to see it. I would have been 6 going on 7. And my parents did not let me anywhere near that movie. And then my dad realized, the second half is safe. Other than Quint getting gored,
but it was
at the very
edited
end. That was edited. Well, he spits the blood, but that's all you see. And then you don't see the biting. You don't see him sort of clamped in the mouth of the animatronic, and you didn't see. There is a shot of the shark withdrawing from the orca with Quint's body in its mouth, but it's after the blood is mixed with the water, so it's not as graphic. But then watching it as it was meant to be seen, it's like, holy shit, this is great. And then getting to see it in theaters, like, I didn't see it in scope until 1992 when the Laserdisc was released. The first, the 3-sided Laserdisc that Universal put out. That's when that came out. Then the box set behind me, that was 1995 with all the special features. Originally, it was just the movie and the trailer. I didn't see it in a theater until 1995. When there was a series of midnight screenings at the Uptown of blessed memory in Toronto. And while we didn't get the Uptown one, sadly, we saw it downstairs, packed house. And the best thing about that was, by this point, knowing the movie note for note, just in absolute awe of watching the thing play a crowd, same as I had with Back to the Future. There was this row of drunk idiots who showed up and thought it would be funny to go "arr" and make pirate noises when Quint showed up, and he doesn't show up for 40 minutes, right? So you're sort of surprised by this voice and these noises from the background of these morons yelling drunkenly "pirate, arr, arr, arr." And then the movie won them. I was going to say it won them over, but it didn't. It beat them into submission, because you can't watch Jaws ironically. It's not possible. It's just too well made when you're trapped in the dark with it. And I've seen this every time. The nervous laughter persists, but you cannot laugh at the movie. It's too real. You're too involved. And again, it's because you don't see the shark. And there's this shadow throughout the film where every time someone gestures towards the water, your body tenses up. Even at the very beginning of the film, when Chrissy runs into the sea, we know what's coming. Even if you've never seen the film before, even if you've never read the book, the poster alone telegraphs it. I did a thing for TIFF a couple of years ago when we programmed Jaws on the digital shelf that was explicitly about that. Like, the shark didn't work, but it's actually, not only was it to the benefit of deepening the characterizations and enriching the film with all these little small town interactions. The first hour is practically an Altman drama.
And Spielberg does that a lot in his films, right? Because like even Jurassic Park, there's a scene outside of the raptor cage where they're all having conversations that overlap with each other.
Yeah, well, he loves actors. The thing that no one gives him credit for, because he defined the blockbuster the way he did, and because so much of his work is visual, he loves letting actors exist. The thing that Jaws does, the thing that Close Encounters does, in E.T. especially, there's almost no necessary dialogue in E.T. Like, that's a storybook, but it's all faces, it's all emotion, it's all experience. And ironically, in E.T., because he shot it from a child's point of view, the only adult face we see is Dee Wallace for the first hour and 3/4, really. Everybody else is, all the other grown-ups are in silhouette, or they're shot from the waist down. But in Jaws, he has this freedom. He can shoot long takes. He has to because he's filling time. Like some part of it, the scene where Brody goes out on the it's not even a ferry, the float that the motorized float they take out to the Boy Scout swim. That's a single take, and it took me, I want to say, 20 screenings to realize that it was a single take, because you don't think about the mechanics of it. You just follow the action, and it's really urgent. There are kids swimming in the water. What's going to happen? And then you get caught up in the drama of watching Roy Scheider as Martin Brody capitulate, like get talked out of saving these kids potentially from a shark. The shark isn't there, so he looks stupid. But we know the shark is real. We've seen it kill somebody already, and he's seen the carnage. He knows it's real. And so this entire, like, it's basically about political cowardice in the face of an economic threat. So much of the genius of Jaws is the way that it applies to everything that's going on in the world, all the cynicism. Like, it is a post-Watergate movie. It's a film about governments that don't have the best interests of their citizenry. It's just in a microcosm of this tiny tourist town, which is watching the summer dollars disappear every time somebody gets eaten, and which ultimately sets up and enables the tragedy on the 4th of July. But
which all could have been prevented, right? Like,
exactly,
that's the thing that's so frustrating. And even the way you're talking about this now, it sounds very similar to what's going on in the rest of the world right now.
That's sort of my point. Like, it's a rich text on a million different levels, but the idea that all politics is local, like that phrase that gets thrown around all the time, just show somebody Jaws. It starts with the mayor leaning on Brody to do some little stuff that isn't even about the shark attack. I mean, maybe you can fudge the report, but he doesn't go through Brody. He goes through the coroner on that one. But at the same time, there's this other little argument that's going on about the guy who constantly pesters Brody about parking spaces and how there's like people taking up space in front of his store, and Polly, his secretary, talking about the karate kids who are karateing the fences, the white picket fences around town. It's a living, thriving community, and it's so well drawn that it never really matters that the trees are bare because they shot in the spring and the fall. You buy into it. Those people on the beach were freezing, but you buy the reality of the place, and then you watch it start to die. And it's just because people aren't listening to each other. It's because everyone's priorities override the public good. And yeah, that is something that never goes away. And in 1975, it wasn't radical to make a film that addresses the underpinnings of this catastrophic failure that ends up killing people and requiring the action movie that comes in the second half of the film. That's how you made a movie. You made a movie built on character and setting and a credible, it's amped up obviously by the filmmaking, but nothing in Jaws is impossible. Everything that happens in blowing up the shark is a stretch, but it's theoretically possible.
But that's also set up in the nuts and bolts of seeing it in the breathing apparatus and the canister in the mouth, right?
Yeah,
like it's
the
all
repeated
there.
warnings of how the thing will explode if you don't pay attention to it. It's a beautifully constructed screenplay, and that comes from the shutdowns. That comes from the fact that they couldn't shoot for months. Richard Dreyfuss has a great story. It's in the documentary on the Laserdisc and the 4K and all the other discs about how every morning, he told it to me too, because I met him on a press junket for Mr. Holland's Opus that same, like 2 weeks after the Laserdisc set came out, and I was sad, I'm like, all I want to do is talk to you about Jaws. He's like, oh, me too. And he told the same story he tells in the video, which is that every morning they were staying at this bed and breakfast at the top of a hill, like a modest grade leading down to the set. So there were 4 blocks that he would walk past. You get up, he would get his coffee. No, sorry, I'm getting it wrong. He would grab his newspaper and he would head down to set, to the shoot, which he could see at the bottom of the road because it was the dock. It was where Martha's Vineyard stopped and the ocean began. And he would walk down and he'd tuck his newspaper under his arm, and it's 8:00 and he's had his breakfast and everything's great. And he's on his way to go play Hooper. And at the first block, there'd be a guy with a walkie-talkie ready to direct traffic away so it wouldn't get caught in the back of the shot. And he'd have the walkie-talkie, and the walkie-talkie would be going, the shark is not working. And he's like, I'll keep going. So we would go down to the next block, and that's where the craft tables were set up. And he'd grab a little styrofoam cup of coffee and maybe think about something else for a minute or talk to somebody from the crew. And there'd be somebody else with a walkie going, the shark is not working. And so he would go, and go down one more block to where all the trucks were, where all the jennies were, all the machinery to set up to make the movie. And there'd be 5 or 6 guys going, the shark's not working. And they wouldn't be on the walkie-talkies anymore. They'd be talking about it. And then he'd get to the dock, and there is Spielberg kicking the mechanical shark that isn't working. And it would be like, well, okay, I'll see you back upstairs. And they went back up to their B&B and sat. And it was him and Robert Shaw when he was around. Sometimes he had to go back to England for tax purposes. And Scheider. Sometimes Lorraine Gary was there, who played Ellen Brody. And the screenwriter Carl Gottlieb, who was around, he also turns up in the film as one of the reporters. And it's great because he's only ever covering bad news, which is sort of the way he felt in the entire project. And then Spielberg, and they would beat down their characters and figure out ways to shoot without the shark. And it meant expanding this scene or that scene, figuring out ways to work around a lack of dialogue for something, like the scene where Brody and Hooper go to the coroner, or not the coroners, to the cold locker to cut open the tiger shark that they catch and prove it's not the same shark. That scene starts in the Brody household with a really depressed Brody having dinner, and his kid is making the same face as him, and that came out of nowhere. That was just, what if I do this? Will that eat up 45 seconds of movie? And it's some of the best stuff because it's all character. It's all about who these people are without the shark or before the shark, and what kind of dynamics are established and why Brody trusts Hooper. It's because he's terrified and out of his depth and doesn't know what he's doing. But then Hooper turns out to be not just good at what he does, which is shark identifying and ichthyology, but he's also just a really nice person that they can bond with, that the two of them have this great friendship. And the biggest mistake of Jaws 2 is that they don't figure out a way to have Richard Dreyfuss back. And it was because he didn't want to, because he knew there should be no Jaws sequels. But just saying, oh, he's not around, he's on an oceanographic expedition in Australia and he's not here right now. And it's just the whole room goes, oh, I like that guy.
Yeah.
Everybody in Jaws is essential. Every moving part of that film has been thought through. There's the 2 guys on the dock who throw a pot roast into the ocean to attract the shark. They have a complete story. They're probably in half of the background shots in the first act of the movie. But as far as we know, we've never seen them before. They're just a couple of idiots. They both survive, but you care that they survive because this menace is so terrifying.
Well, we know what it's capable of, right?
Yeah,
like that's the
exactly.
thing. Like that first sequence, we know, from the point of view, and it's also just terrifying because our imagination is working overtime in that Hitchcockian way of feeling like, okay, well, what is on the other side of that camera? You know? Yeah.
Well, the darkness of it, the fact that we don't see the shark clearly, it always strikes me as bizarre that Alien is only 4 years away because Alien learns everything from Jaws. And by the time Alien comes out, don't show the monster. It used to be a restriction based on terrible project. It used to be because people had bad makeup effects. Like it was, 1960s films where monsters in the closet and you only ever see one arm coming out because they can't afford to build the whole monster. Jaws could have shown the shark, and does in a few scenes, have a very, very fake, static animatronic because that's the best they could get. And it doesn't matter because it works. The scene where Billy Kintner gets eaten and the Bobby Kintner? The Kintner boy. Alex Kintner. Sorry, yeah. Who's Billy? The scene where Alex Kintner gets eaten is a long shot of a fairly static, it's got fins, but it's just being rotated. It's not doing anything, but it's terrifying because you have the kid screaming and the blood burst and there's clearly something happening, but it's at a distance to protect the shark from looking phony. But it's brilliant because we can't see what's going on, and it makes you lean forward even though you don't want to see what's going on.
The way Roy Scheider does in that scene, and the way it's almost distracting you. Spielberg knows how to distract you from what you should be looking at, but it's almost like a magic act in a way.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. And his visual sensibility is unparalleled. And this guy is 27 years old making his 3rd movie.
That's frustrating.
It puts us all to shame. It absolutely does. it's an incredible piece of work. And while you could argue that some of his subsequent films and most of his subsequent films are more sophisticated because he had more to work with and reaching, a point like with Jurassic Park, where if something didn't work, you figured out a way to make it work because you had the money and you had the budget and you had people behind you and you could swap in a piece that wasn't functioning. Jaws is a brilliant person pushed to work really hard just to achieve the thing he wants to achieve. And what you feel is the energy and the desperation, but the energy drives the story. Every single piece of it is necessary. There isn't a scene in the film that could be cut without affecting the story because it's all built to structure. It's a structure that is all built to get us onto the orca. And then once we're on the orca, it's still character development. It's still about who these guys are. And then the shark still is attacking them in the dark, out of sight. The barrels represent the thing more than the animatronic does because, first of all, again, what's underneath the barrels? It's terrifying. It's unsettling. They could pop up anywhere and you still wouldn't know exactly where they are in relation to the shark. And then also, and this is the thing that I brought up in that TIFF video that we did, everybody already knew what the shark looked like. Like, it looks like that. Yeah. It was on the poster. It was on the book cover. There were hundreds of thousands of copies of it everywhere. You couldn't walk into a theater playing Jaws and not pass that poster. So your brain is filling in so much of it. It's just brilliant in terms of marketing synergy, which is two words they didn't have at the time.
You're talking about, Jaws being such an important part of pop culture and permeated, and it's hard not to know the references to Jaws, even if you haven't seen the movie, in the same way that, Back to the Future or Star Wars or Alien. Are there moments when you're watching the movie still that you jump or still feel that thrill that you had the first time you watched the movie?
Not really, no, but it's a different thrill. Every time I've seen it in a theater, and it's, not often, maybe 5 times overall. I've seen the movie a lot more often than that, but you just don't get that many opportunities. I think about this, actually. I've seen it in 4 of the 5 screens at the Lightbox, but not Cinema 1. Yeah. Paulie and I were trying to make that happen a few years ago, and we still will, God damn it. I don't know how, but we'll make that happen. But I've seen it in 2, 3, 4. I've introduced it in 3. I've seen it in 2, 4, and 5. And when they rebuilt 5, this has got to be 10 years ago, they invited me to a screening the week before the festival, the Monday night before the festival. And you know what that's like. We're all feverishly typing and working and doing our look aheads and curtain raisers. And they said, can you make it 7:00 on Monday night? We're going to test out Cinema 5 and show everybody what kind of experience it is with the proper seating and the revamped screen. And I was like, I'm really busy. And they said, well, we're screening Jaws. And I'm like, I'll be there. Of course. But every time I watch it, I realize I'm kind of listening to the crowd and feeling it with an audience. Paulie and I screened it as a birthday present to ourselves at the Review in 2019 on August 15th. We both have the same birthday on the 16th. And so we talked to the Review and they were doing a hot summer series and they're like, well, we were thinking about screening Jaws. Do you guys want to come and host? And it's like, yes, absolutely. And it was almost full. It was, I don't know, whatever the capacity of the Review is, less maybe 5 seats. It was a good seller. And friends came and strangers came, and you just get to experience the film through the energy in the room over, and it's so much fun. You can feel people tensing up in certain moments. You can feel people relax and then get caught again with the chum line when the shark finally rears its head. The head in the boat, there's Ben always Gardner, 3 people. Yeah, poor Ben Gardner. And, he had it coming. But there's always a moment where somebody in the crowd mutters, like, oh, this is a head in the boat, and gets caught anyway. It's great. It's so much fun to listen to an engaged, active audience. It's so much fun to be in the room with them and experience them. And I only hope that, Spielberg is, because there were years where he just didn't want to talk about it anymore. He burned himself out talking about it. And it was this thing he was not interested in re-exploring. And then they grudgingly, whenever they do these anniversary documentaries or special editions, he'll show up for maybe 5 minutes and like, yeah, Jaws. I've already said it. He's probably in this movie right now. I've already said that stuff that I'm going to say. But I hope he gets to sneak into a theater every now and then and just feel the movie with people, because it's the best experience, especially when it still plays. Like, the shark is still working after 50 years. It's untouched as an experience. The sequels are all just who's okay, but it's not good.
You're being generous.
Well, I revisited it 2 years ago, maybe.
Did you buy the Blu-rays or the 4Ks?
Paul actually gave me the 4K. Sorry, not the 4K. Paul gave me a British Steelbook of Jaws 2 as a birthday present. That's the thing. That's the awful thing we do. We trade stupid Jaws presents with each other. At the screening, at the review, we gave each other the same things, which was absolutely hysterical. We didn't coordinate it at all, but we gave each other the same Funkos of Brody, Hooper, and Quint, and one each of the shark. His had a scuba tank, mine didn't, so it was a slight difference. And the game, the Ravensworth, the board game, which I still have yet to play because COVID made that impossible. But if you listen to the podcast episode we did 9 years ago,
back
just
in
before Kim's
2016,
came out, you can actually hear us become friends in real time, which is absolutely one of my favorite things about the podcast. Is great because you connect to somebody immediately over the films that they're bringing in, because when you're talking to somebody about a movie they love, they can't help but be themselves. All the talking points fall away, all the pitch, all the sales, the persona. You have a genuine conversation, and yeah, it was just such a blast to sit there with somebody whose work I knew but who I'd never actually met in person before, and meet him. And it's like meeting him through this shared love of a movie that was massively important to both of us, and still is, because, how often do you get to point to one of your favorite films and say, oh, it holds up? Like, the one thing, and it is unfortunate, but it's also the reality of American cinema at the time, there is one black person in the entire movie, and he has no dialogue. It's just a guy letting people off the ferry, to the point where when he shows up, you're like, oh my God, that is the only black person in this film. It is completely white. But that said, Martha's Vineyard was pretty white in 1975, so it actually is an accurate portrait of its moment. And I think the commentary of the social commentary comes through in terms of the class commentary, the stuff between Quint and Hooper, and the city and suburban thing that's going on with Brody trying to fit into the island. There's a lot of other stuff going on, but it is
masculinity too, right? Like,
very much so.
Who's the one that's in charge? And you see, Brody kind of in between Hooper and Quint, and him, Brody able to kind of navigate those two. I think there's like a lot of little moments in the movie as well. You're talking like about how it's not just one specific film. It's not just a horror movie. It's not just, a sea adventure. It's a character study. There's so many things. And like the moment that really stuck out to me, when I was a kid and, wanting to have a friend like Hooper or Brody, or have that kind of friendship, is like that little moment where Brody reminds Hooper about his glasses when he's getting into the tank. And it's just like that little piece, like it's a throwaway thing, but it just shows like how much like he cares. And also, being someone that wears glasses, is like you always forget to take them off when you need to. So things like that are just like perfect touches.
Yeah, well, he's paying attention. The Spielberg and Brody, like the characters are looking out for each other. The movie establishes this constant sense of buzzy danger. There's something every time. The thing that I love the most, honestly, now about seeing it with an audience, is the shot where Brody's topsider slips off the gunwale for a second, and he catches himself in the second half of the film. They're all racing to get from one side of the boat to the other, from the stern to the bow, and there's just this moment where the foot slips and you hear this squeak. Every single time I see it with an audience, there's this big gasp because they know what's in the water.
Yeah.
And he doesn't fall in. Nobody gets hurt. It's completely anodyne behavior. Everybody knows what it's like to slip on a boat. But now everybody knows what it's like to slip on a boat in an ocean with a 25-foot shark underneath you. And that is those little tiny character beats. Because if we didn't care about the guy with the foot, right? Like another guy loses his leg and it's just a moment that's kind of cool. But we worry about these guys. We are invested in the three men on the boat. And I've barely mentioned Robert Shaw, who is so good at being a cartoon and then so good at revealing the reason he's a cartoon. Like the front that Quint puts on is absolutely a front, but he's been pretending to be this brave powerhouse shark killer for so long that he can't stop doing it, which is what ends up getting him killed. The Moby Dick of it all, the Captain Ahab thing, like the Indianapolis monologue, which again was not in the original script. It was alluded to, but they didn't break that until like I think 2 weeks before they shot it. And even then, there were stories about who finally gets credit for it. Robert Shaw's kid wrote a play where Robert Shaw gets the credit for it, but it's probably John Milius with Shaw polishing it. And it's the same thing that happened. It's the reason those guys couldn't make the pirate noises all the way through the movie. You have to take him seriously when you realize he's competent. He is an oaf. He's a buffoon. He's proud of his ignorance. You know, he doesn't want to be in the National Geographic, and he doesn't have any respect for Hooper, who's been counting money all his life because he's got soft hands. But it's because Hooper wears gloves. But it's because Hooper can afford to wear gloves. And all of that stuff plays in. And it's the thing that you were saying about how Brody's sort of in the middle between the two of them. There is no better expression of that than, again, another scene that has, or a moment that has no dialogue. It's all played out by the actors. It's the comparison of scars between Quint and Hooper. You know, Mary Ellen Moffat, She Broke My Heart, all that stuff. But they're all war wounds. They're all reasons for why they're confident around marine animals and why they think they're tough enough. And it sets up the Indianapolis speech, which is, again, the centerpiece of the film with nothing but dialogue. But you also get that little cutaway of Brody turning away from them to check on his appendix scar to see if he could even bring that up and figure out a way. Like, it's all on Scheider's face. It's like, can I claim this as a scar? Does this count? And it doesn't. But that humanizes him even more because he's insecure. He's not competent. He doesn't have any idea what he's doing. He doesn't like to be on the water. He wants to be at home. Which, again, another beautiful arc that's never really expressed. 3 little moments. Martin stays in his car in the ferry. There's a word for that, isn't there? Drowning. And then at the very end, maybe my favorite exchange of any movie anywhere, because it is this beautiful release along with John Williams' score, right? Like, I used to hate the water. I can't imagine why. It's just, I love it so much.
It's one of the great send-offs too. Like, it feels like the buddy comedy has solidified in that moment, in a way. Like, this friendship is going to last for a while. They have this thing that is obviously very traumatic. But even when Hooper asks about Quint before that moment, there's a feeling of like, oh, Hooper now actually really did care about Quint because of that SS Indianapolis monologue and that moment all 3 of them spent together,
Yeah. No, it's a film about people. It's not a film about a shark. The shark is absolutely, germane at any given moment. It's the inciting incident. It's the reason we're all there. But because, again, this is the mid-1970s. It's the new American cinema movement. It's Bonnie and Clyde and Dog Day Afternoon and Pelham 123 and all the films that were coming out of the U.S., 5 Easy Pieces, that were just character studies. And Spielberg had done it before, excuse me, with Duel and the Sugarland Express, both of which are genre pictures. They're chase films, but they are so centered on their humans because Spielberg, for all of his facility with special effects, he knows that we won't care about what's going on if we don't care about the people involved. And so he builds these characters up. I mean, again, I'm sure the initial pitch for Jaws would have been a straight adaptation of the Benchley novel, more shark, more victims, just as much Brody, Hooper, and Quint, but with less dialogue or less thoughtfulness. And it would have been perfectly fine, and we'd all be very happy with it, and Spielberg probably still goes on to make Close Encounters his way, and that changes things. That revolutionizes his approach to cinema instead of Jaws. But because he has to work his ass off every second of the day to make Jaws function, he gains another level of respect for the actors that he's always believed in, and for the craftspeople who build his movies, because he's seeing exactly what they go through. And I think it makes him a better director. I don't think you get Raiders without Jaws. You do get Close Encounters because Star Wars happens anyway and the science fiction boom is already going and the excitement is there. So he gets that greenlit, even though it maybe in World Without Jaws, it doesn't rush to be a Christmas picture, so he gets to finish it properly. And it comes out in the summer of 78, and it's a whole different thing. But Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark are dancing in lockstep. Those are 2 films where the technical packages support the acting at every step and lead you to work harder, to use your imagination and figure out what's going on in any given shot. They're just, nobody does it better. He is who he is for a reason.
Absolutely. And it's also just fascinating to think about, like, he could have easily coasted on Jaws and the
Oh
success of
yeah.
Jaws, but for him to follow that up with Close Encounters and, like even E.T. and Raiders, it just is like, this was a director, like, obviously he's earned that level of notoriety and, accomplishment, and, the word Spielberg being something that is a household name. There's that level of him being a technician as well. And even you're reminded of it in, more recent stuff like West Side Story, his remake and evaluation of it, and looking at it from a different perspective, and then also with the Fablemans. I think the Fablemans is such a fascinating one because the way that he has always talked about, the greatest show on earth traumatizing him as a child,
Yeah.
and now him traumatizing generations of people that were watching Jaws in the same way. Like, you're talking about, like even the pan and scan version, or watching, half of it on TV, and then, finally watching the full version. I don't know how you feel about it, but I always felt like Jaws for me, in the same way growing up, my parents divorced when I was around 10, and I always felt like when I first watched Jaws, and it was a copy of the VHS that my dad had, it was almost like my first sort of dip into film school. Like, this was like I was appreciating movies more than just entertainment. Like, it didn't feel like it was just a movie. It felt like I was trying to dissect and understand why the movie made me feel terrified, but completely engaged with it.
Yeah, I wonder if that isn't part of Spielberg's camera work, like his naturalism with the camera and the way it. Sorry, I'll take that again.
Yeah, no worries.
I wonder if it isn't part of the way Spielberg approaches the camera, or the way the camera regards the action, because his films do feel guided and steered in a way that is very, very natural and very, very intuitive, but it also makes you look closely at everything you see. The subjective camera to represent the shark in Jaws absolutely pulls you right in, and if you see it more than twice, you can't help wondering why they went with that, even if you don't. I mean, and then you find out why, and then it all makes sense. But it does invite you to watch more closely, to get more involved. He has this signature tilt up, pan down thing that I'm trying to figure out. I think it happens maybe once in the estuary scene in Jaws. Is the only time that it comes in. It doesn't happen on the Orca, which you would think it would, but they couldn't do it because the movement of the boat and the juddering of the horizon made it impossible to do a safe tilt without making the audience seasick. But that stuff invites you in and tells you someone's in control. So I can absolutely see you starting to wonder who it is and why they're making the choices they make, because that's how it worked with me on Back to the Future, E.T. certainly. It's the films, they're not anonymous. Like, they are handmade in a way. Even his most digital work, like Tintin, is still constructed in a way that says, I'm thinking about this and you can trust me. And Jaws is just it grabs you by the throat at the very beginning and just pulls you along in its wake with this undercurrent of tension, because there's a menace and no one is stopping it. And why aren't people stopping it? That puts you in Brody's shoes. But it also, as an audience member, that's the reason people were afraid to go back in the water, because it gets in your head. You can't stop thinking about the shark, even when you're on land at the top of that hill with the bed and breakfast behind you and you can safely go to bed and not worry about it. No, that's still a threat. There's still something out there. And the agency with which the shark operates is something that comes through the direction as well, because we have to believe that it's unpredictable. Because when we see it, it's, black eyes, lifeless eyes, like a doll's eyes. There's no emotion in the shark. There's no character to it. It's what Brody says. It's what Hooper says. It does nothing but swim and eat and make little sharks. But it's the stupidity of the humans. It's the short-sightedness of the people at Amity. It's the desperation that mounts over the course of the film as Brody tries to get anyone to sign the voucher so he can hire Quint and go out to sea and kill this thing. And the tragedies that have to happen before people listen to him. That is something we can all identify with, because everybody at some point in their life has been in a worst case scenario or seen it coming and not been able to stop it. And again, it's the human element. You're relating to these characters. You're not just watching passively as something eats them up. That's, I love Halloween, the Carpenter film, but it is a machine. It's a perfect engine, but it doesn't really care that much about anybody except Jamie Lee Curtis, because she's the final girl and she's going to have to survive and be interesting. Jaws makes you care about every single person. I don't like Mayor Vaughn, but I respect his position. He's a weak man in a bad place. And in the
He's
sequel,
still a human being, right?
yeah,
Like that's
in
the
the sequel,
thing.
he's still the mayor, so he must have
That's
come up with
astonishing. But then in this day and age, I mean, it is possible, right?
Yeah. Well, this is what I was saying about the film still being relevant 50 years later. That was running around last year when people were talking about Trump's reelection, right? Like, remember, if you don't vote, remember
Vaughn
the
wins.
mayor in Jaws is the mayor in Jaws too. That's because not enough people voted out the shark guy. And the mayor of Shark City, sorry. And it's funny, Murray Hamilton makes him so charming and so sleazy and so nakedly opportunistic and then feeble and desperate once he gets pushed into a corner. There's a portrait there. That's a person. He's not a good person, but he is a whole human being. And yeah, like the guys on the dock, everybody is. Every life lost is a tragedy in this movie. And every life saved is on Quentin, Brody, and Hooper, and good for them.
Absolutely. Now, you did mention Halloween and John Carpenter, and obviously that being a well-oiled machine, and the cinematography, and Dean Cundey, who would go on to work with Spielberg as well.
Yep.
And you also talked a little bit about the taking of Pelham 123, which has Robert Shaw and was directed by Joseph Sargent, which who would go on to direct Jaws 4: The Revenge.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's nobody's idea of a good movie.
No, it's not. Maybe some people seem to enjoy the novelization because it is so strange. I know with Flophouse, they've talked about it in the past.
Yeah, I've heard tell, but I've never read it. And I've seen Jaws: The Revenge. I don't need to spend any more time with Jaws: The Revenge. It's on the shelf.
Did you see it theatrically, though? Or did you see it on video?
No, I saw it on video with the alternate ending. I didn't see the original ending for a while. And they're both stupid.
Oh, they're awful. They're awful.
That's the problem.
But of all the Jaws sort of copycats or, films that took inspiration from them, are there any movies that you can think of that you really enjoyed? Like, obviously, like I'm thinking more of a recency bias, but like I look at what Jordan Peele did with Nope, and I feel like he took all the right lessons from Spielberg, but still made something of his own with Jean Jacket and just the atmosphere and the world building of those characters.
Yeah, Nope's a great example because it's Jaws and Close Encounters, like fighting with each other at certain points to figure out what kind of a movie it's going to be, which is wonderful. And I would love to sit down with him someday and just go through his love of Spielberg, not even as it pertains to Nope, but like that guy is a student. He's definitely thought about every decision Spielberg has ever made, and especially in his early work, to figure out how he can use it in his own films. Us is also very Spielbergian. I don't think it's necessarily rooted in any one film, but the camera work and the approach to character are very familiar to me in that one, as opposed to Get Out, which is much more of its own comic energy thing, and Nope, which is just a wholehearted salute to Spielberg to the point where when Michael Wincott shows up as their Quint, it's just like, oh, we're going there, awesome. I think Piranha, Joe Dante's Piranha, which was just a quick knockoff that was commissioned by Roger Corman, like so many Roger Corman movies. It's like, oh, that's a hit, make me one. But John Sayles wrote it and Joe Dante directed it, and it's funny. It's smart. It also understands that a tiny threat is very inherently not as scary as a giant threat, but you could have a lot of tiny threats and they move faster than a shark. Therefore, what can we do with that dynamic? And it turns out not very much because, again, they didn't have the money to do anything really impressive. But it's all because they have no monster money and because they are shooting it in 10 days or 15 days, it's all dialogue driven. So they have to come up with fun comedy lines and engaging character beats to keep you interested. And yeah, it's not great, but it's funny and it's charming and it loves Jaws. Like it loves what it's ripping off. So that's the other thing. I think the reason so many of them fail is because Spielberg set such a high bar with the original that the audience knows what you're doing the second they buy the ticket. Like this is another water monster movie. That's all this is ever going to be. And if you surprise them, you know what was a good one? Deep Rising, which isn't really Jaws. It's a sea monster on an ocean liner with Treat Williams and Famke Janssen and Kevin O'Connor. But that's the thing that Stephen Sommers, the director, does. He made the Mummy movies, with the first two with Brendan Fraser, the good ones. And he understands that we're there to have fun. We're here to, maybe something will scare you, but we're here to care about characters and watch them crank at each other while they run away from a monster, and we can do that. So as far as aquatic films that tip their hats to Jaws, that's a pretty good one.
Cliff Curtis, I gotta say, by the way, Cliff Curtis in
Oh
that
yeah, yeah,
movie
he's in there.
is also in Virus and then the Meg movies. So it's very funny that he's drawn to aquatic horror or thrillers on the high sea.
People know he looks good wet. That's all it ever is. His hair does something cool. Yeah, I like the Meg movies, but they're kind of limited by the fact that it's
Yes.
giant shark stuff and that Jason Statham never punches one, which is all I want. I want to either watch him punch it or hit it with a truck. And at no point in either Meg film has that happened, so I'm a little disappointed. I mean, the Meg 2 is directed by Ben Wheatley, who's one of my favorite filmmakers, and it's so bizarre that he's in that seat. But I know he likes Jaws and doesn't want to touch it.
Nobody,
sort of
I don't think
actively
anybody
avoids
does, right? Like that's the thing
Yeah.
that I am surprised, celebrating this 50th anniversary, that it hasn't been remade, even though even like something like Deep Blue Sea, other movies like that have taken inspiration, but it hasn't been remade. And I wonder if that is because of Spielberg himself
I'm
having
sure it is.
some control over it, or just because it was so popular. But it does feel like, okay, there probably is someone out there that thinks this is prime for a remake, and I hope it doesn't happen.
I don't see how it could. I mean, the technology has advanced at this point to, sonar is so much more sophisticated, and cell phones and walkie-talkie tech is more sophisticated than it was 50 years ago. There really wouldn't be an issue. Also, I think the problem too is that it is impossible to remake Jaws in a world that doesn't have Jaws in it. So, as opposed to zombie movies where you can endlessly have people who've never seen Night of the Living Dead, like Shaun of the Dead is an exception because everyone is versed already in what you need to do and they all know it, and then they screw up because they're human, and that's where the comedy and the tragedy comes from in Shaun of the Dead. But Jaws is so simple and so pervasive that I can't see it working in the present day, and I can't see it working as a new story, which is why all the sequels falter, because they're always tied to the Brody family, which they shouldn't be. It's like the Star Wars Skywalker problem. Sharks eat lots of people. Well, not that many, 10 a year, but sharks attack other families, other communities. The idea that I remember the novelization of Jaws 2, which I did read because I was too little to see Jaws 2 when it came out in theaters. The novelization of Jaws 2 posits that the shark in this one is the mate of the first, and she's followed him, presuming that the first shark was a male, which, like, why not? Sure. And that the second shark is a female, and she's pregnant, and so she's declared that Amity is going to be where she spawns. So underneath this is the subtext is that there are going to be more little sharks if you don't kill the big one before it gives birth. And the book has this bizarre moment where, as Brody electrocutes the second shark, he actually sees one of them birthing or something. He sees one of them is wiggled out, but the author of the novelization makes sure we understand that the baby is also being electrocuted, which I think is more than that movie can accommodate safely. But if you start again, you don't have the characters. You don't have any of the fun that we associate with Jaws. You have to build all of that originally again from new parts, and you have to pretend that those people have never seen Jaws, which I don't think you can do. The closest I can think of is the other shark movie. It wasn't a shark, it was the alligator, Lake Placid.
Yes.
That came out in 98 or 99. Was it the same year as Deep Blue Sea, or was it a year before? Right around that same time.
Yeah, because, well, even just mentioning John Sayles, like John Sayles also worked on Alligator too. So
Yeah.
like not Alligator 2, but Alligator. So,
Yeah, and Alligator is really fun because it's landlocked. Like, it is the dumbest idea, but it's really, really well done. It's beautifully written. Louis Teague, who went on to make Cujo, has a feel for animal action. Also, nobody minds that the alligator looks fake because it's a cheap production and no one expects it to look great. And Robert Forster has this incredible goodwill too. Like, he doesn't want to be there. As an actor, I'm sure he's having a ball, but the character doesn't want to be there. He just wants to go back to bed and not think about this. But of course, you have to chase the giant alligator. That's your job. So they found a new angle on it. Like, what if Quint was a working stiff who just wanted to be doing literally anything else? But also, you're making it for no money. You can have fun with it. With Jaws as a property, and I think it's why all the sequels fail too, because they keep trying to outdo the last one. You can't. You simply can't. Jaws had novelty, invention, terrific casting, all those factors that make it a classic, the sequels have to work with bits and pieces and then say, but what if this was bigger? And that's like SeaWorld 3D. No, it just doesn't work. It's not as interesting. And unfortunately, it's not Dennis Quaid's fault, but they're not given the material support. They're not given the money or the screenwriting to really make a film that's worthy of the thing they're making a sequel to.
Or to make that a comedy, because that's also where Joe Dante was originally going to do Jaws 3 People Zero.
I think that was Landis, wasn't it?
I thought
John
it was
Landis
Joe,
was talking.
I thought it was Joe Dante.
I mean, it may have gone to both of them, but the first time I heard about it was Landis.
Interesting, because I know with Joe Dante, like he kind of obviously became a part of the Spielberg, apparatus with Gremlins and things like that. But yeah, no, it's interesting. Like even something like Tremors, like I feel like that's an interesting way to kind of take the creature formula and play it on land, and
Yep.
with all of these permutations that have come since Jaws, like it has played such a huge role in the landscape of genre filmmaking. Even something like Crawl, like I feel like all of these movies owe a little bit to Jaws, but maybe don't get the dynamics and all those little elements together, or the happy accidents that you mentioned. Because it reminded me a little bit with Die Hard, where Bruce Willis was shooting, Moonlighting, and they had to beef up some of the supporting roles on the ground, or even like you talking about how it's harder to believe or have that suspension of disbelief with the Jaws sequels in the same way that Jurassic Park, after the first movie, it's like, well, why would Ian Malcolm go back? Or, why would Dr. Alan Grant go back? And like, these characters are smart enough to say no. So you have to find ways to bring them back. And like you're saying, it's competing against the first movie.
Yeah, some things are non-repeatable phenomenons. I think that's what Goldman called any hit that Hollywood doesn't want to follow and learn a lesson from. It's like, oh, well, that only happens once. And with Jaws, the money was so huge. Like it codified the American blockbuster at a level that had never been. I think The Godfather had broken 100 million before, but that was the only other film. And it was too long to be a massive success, like on the same scale, because you can only get 3 shows a day. Jaws, 2 hours, 4 minutes. You can show that 6 times a day if you get up early. And you make a lot of money. And of course, the way films were released guaranteed that it ran forever, just because you couldn't. I mean, now you kids today with the digital, a DCP, a hard drive can be screened on every screen in your complex if they're all digital projectors. Like that was the big deal when AMC opened its 24-plex at Yonge and Dundas in Toronto, however many years ago, 15 or so, maybe more. They were like, and we could watch this movie, this hard drive could play every screen in this theater, and we could sell out every show, but we'll never run out of seats. People will always be able to buy a ticket for a show in 15 or 20 minutes if they can't see the one they want to see. Jaws was released in an era when movie theaters, maybe you had 3 screens. Maybe. Probably it was 2. More likely it was 1. And people would line up around the block and wait for hours to see it, or they'd buy a ticket for the 6 o'clock show at 2 o'clock and go have lunch or breakfast, dinner, whatever, go for a walk or something. But it became appointment viewing out of necessity. And it wasn't released on 6,000 screens. I think it was released on 600 originally. And it just wouldn't stop. And when they stood in line outside the theater, they had to see the poster, and the poster infects them and gets their imagination going when they see the movie and they can't see the shark. That is a non-repeating phenomenon, because it changed the culture so spectacularly that it is now impossible to have that kind of experience. You can't. Movies are everywhere all at once for their opening weekend, and they make 50%, or at least this is 5 years ago. It probably has changed since then with the way people go to theaters now. But 5 years ago, a movie made half its box office on its first 3 days because of saturation screenings. And the rest of it was a trail off. Jaws played for years. I'm pretty sure Jaws was still in theaters, although it might have been the re-release when Jaws 2 opened. You could still see Jaws in a theater somewhere in America. And that doesn't happen anymore. But, what if it did? We'd live in such a wonderful place if you could just go see Jaws anywhere at any time.
That would be amazing. And I'm hoping that they're doing something for this anniversary, because it doesn't seem like anything has been announced, and we're in the month of June and when it was originally released. But it's just thinking about, like, even in 1975, you mentioned earlier on in this conversation, Dog Day Afternoon, you had Nashville, Night Moves, Armicord, like all of these amazing movies that came out in 1975, and it still have all pretty much last, the test of time. But there is something about Jaws where it's a favorite film, but it's also a great movie. Like there's so many aspects of that of watching it. And even with all the documentaries, the plays, the behind the scenes featurettes, like Steven Soderbergh is supposed to be writing a behind the scenes documentary narrative of this, and it never takes away from the mystique of the movie. Like, it still works to this day, just in terms of pure enjoyment. And I find that is a miracle in itself.
Oh, absolutely. And, as facile as it sounds, that is why it's a classic. You can appreciate it intellectually for its construction and for the ingenuity required to make it happen in the first place. And the documentaries are all, there is no single documentary about, oh, wow, Jaws doesn't work anymore. You can't. It's unassailable as an accomplishment, as an achievement. And then financially, there's the use case for making a movie like this with the talent that they had, and whatever people will write theses on it, none of that is relevant to the film, because when you watch the film, nothing else matters. You are pulled in, plopped down, and forced to endure this waking nightmare that Martin Brody experiences through his eyes. And again, coming back to that part in the second half where the music is fun for a little while, where Williams lets it be an adventure and clue you into what kind of story this can be if Brody just gets out of his head for a second. And it's not great advice, because the minute you stop respecting the shark, it does kill you. But I think I just stole that from The Rock. But the sense of adventure and play is communicable. It comes out of the screen. It is a horror film. It's a monster movie. It's a drama. In the end, it's a chamber piece for 45 minutes. But at every moment, it has your whole interest. It has your full attention, because Spielberg has demonstrated from the beginning what kind of movie he's making, how much he needs you to be part of it, how much your imagination is going to be involved, how much engagement is required. And it just is unlike anything else. And I know Soderbergh is a fan, and again, if I could sit down and talk to him for a day with a camera, I think I would have my own Jaws documentary, just his appreciation of it. But there is a reason it holds on, and it's because it is unique. There are other films that are like it. There are other films that are called Jaws, and there are other films that wish they'd been called Jaws. But this one film from 1975 did something that has never been done before or since. And I don't even know what that is, but it's singular and unique. And every time I screen it for people, every time I watch it with somebody, you feel it all over again. There is this incredible discovery happening in there. Like, this is going to be the way people make movies forever, and they're not going to be as good as this. It's this remarkable tipping point of something. The moment when art became commercial, the moment where adaptations became legitimized as Hollywood bait, as opposed to, big important prestige projects. You could take a crappy book, because it's not a great book. You could
the
take
mafia stuff and the affairs.
And the affair, yeah, like it was Peyton Place with a monster. And if you strip all that stuff out and boil it down to characters, because that is the other thing, even when they knew the shark wasn't working, they didn't go back to the novel. They knew that stuff wasn't going to fly. They knew that people had seen Peyton Place. They knew that was its own soap opera. They didn't want that. They didn't want to interrupt the bonding between Brody and Hooper by having the thing with Ellen come up. They meet once, and that's all it takes. It's fine. There's no spark. Like, he respects her as Brody's wife and all of that, and none of their personal history and nonsense that was in the book. It's just on the it's in the bin. It's over. That's not important. What's important are these three people and why they're on the boat together, and the circumstances that put them there. But what happens once they're on the boat? And it's not about the shark. It can't be about the shark, so it has to be about them. And that is the accident. You cannot plan for that. You cannot recreate that. I actually did think once that it would be fun to watch somebody try to spring that on his cast and crew, like to deliberately set up an obstacle like the 5 obstructions that Von Trier did. Soderbergh would be incredibly perverse about this. Find a way to disrupt your movie and make people have to go in a different direction. But the only way you can do that is to build in this massive insurance contingency, and no one will do it. So short of an actor dying and having to reshoot his part or replace it, or I know Woody Allen dumped the original version of September and shot it again with an entirely different cast, but we'll never see the original cast, so we'll never know what that was supposed to be. Jaws took advantage of a crisis in a way that no other film ever did. And it was being made by the people who in the moment were the best possible people to make that. That can't be repeated. Or, well, it can't be replicated. It might happen again someday, and my heart goes out to whoever it is that it happens to, but they'll get a masterpiece out of it, so it's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just like a little thing that I think we did touch upon a little bit in terms of what you were mentioning, even the idea of it being a horror movie, but it feeling as though localism, is something where Brody feels kind of isolated because everybody's like, well, you're not an islander, you don't
Yeah.
really belong here. Like even that is a story that could be its own full narrative, and feeling like you're completely isolated from the community that you live in.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of movies about people who, well, what's the line? There are only, Harlan Ellison, I think, said there were only 7 stories, but there are really only 2. Someone goes on a journey or a stranger comes to town. And they're the same story, right? Like it's all about perspective. But Brody is a misfit. He's moved to the island because he saw some stuff in New York that he couldn't handle, which is never explained, which I love. There's never anything there were theories. There are lots of theories. A number of reviews because Scheider had made the French Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're making jokes about that. And like, oh, well, he was a dirty cop or something bad happened or he's in witness protection. No, he just didn't like what was happening in New York in the 70s, which is an easy like punching bag. Obviously, in the early 70s, New York was not a place you wanted to raise 2 kids, especially if you were going out with a gun every night to uphold the law and probably catch a bullet. We don't need the backstory. My greatest fear is that someone is going to do like a Martin Brody Year One movie where, Jacob Elordi runs out and plays the young Scheider, and I don't want to see
After
that.
playing a young Richard Gere? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And a young, no. We
Or
just
Quince.
don't want
Like I always heard that there was like an interest that there would be like an
Indianapolis
movie. Yeah, and that was
There
something.
are a couple.
Yeah.
They're not very good because
There's the one with Nick Cage, which is like a
Yep.
DTV film.
Yeah, and there was a cable movie. I think Stacy Keach is in it. Is it the same one? Probably not,
Maybe.
because that was in the 90s and they wouldn't have gotten Cage.
But they could get Keach. No Cage,
They
but
could get
Keach.
Cage. Yeah. Yeah, you could probably get Cage. But they're inherently limited because either you have to show the sharks and the carnage and then there's no drama. Because it's just a Friday the 13th movie, right? Where somebody has to die every 20 minutes in order to, I mean, we've done that with Open Water, which is great, but is not a military story in any way. Or you do what Spielberg did. You keep the camera above the water level and you never show the sharks. You just show people disappearing. And that's monotonous in a different way. So no, there's a reason it's a 5-minute monologue. Like not everything needs to be a prequel, but I know that they tried. God knows they tried.
Yeah. Well, even with Peter Benchley's other novels, like obviously you had The Deep come out after this, which has Robert Shaw in it. And then, in the 90s, The Beast and Creature, which, I mean,
Yeah.
I like The Beast as like an idea, like as a concept. I'm actually kind of surprised they've never cracked the octopus or squid movie other than 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in one section. But
Yeah.
like that does seem like something that could work. But then, you have even someone like Frank Marshall who goes and preys on, arachnophobia and the fears of spiders. So again, Jaws, like I feels like that movie owes or has a legacy not only on the film, but on Hollywood as a whole in terms of what it's inspired.
Absolutely. I mean, Jaws meets something, right? Like that's a really easy way to sell it. What was the movie that was sold as Jaws with claws? Was it Prophecy?
Maybe.
Frankenheimer's
Yeah.
film?
The bear.
Yeah, which it isn't. Like it doesn't work. That's a completely different kind of monster movie, unfortunately. Because it had some good ideas. It just didn't have the money or the time to pull it off. But there's a reason people keep coming back to it. And it's this, I think it's the simplicity of it, but there are so few things that are that simple that you can execute the way Spielberg did it. Like it's the argument going on now about writers who turn to AI and to finish or beef up their work. And it's not, first of all, it's not artificial intelligence. It's just a language generator. It's cut and paste. It's predictive text. If you say, I want this, it'll give you the thing it thinks you want, but it won't necessarily be true, valid, or interesting. And that is the same idea. It's like you can have an idea. 100 people can be given the same idea for Star Wars, and you'll get 100 different pitches because they won't think of it the same way. And that's what Jaws is. Like Benchley's book isn't the movie. Carl Gottlieb's script isn't the movie. Spielberg's initial vision isn't the movie. It happened because of all of the things that happened to it that were human experiences that fed back into the script and then into the film and then the editing room too. And all of those pieces were so unique and so specific that now, yes, Jaws stands as the high watermark for a certain type of cinema, monster movies, horror movies. There's a reason that Godzilla Minus One has a scene where the monster chases a boat. It's because that guy loves Jaws and was inspired by it and spent however many years trying to figure out how he would find a way to make a Jaws reference in a Godzilla movie if he ever got the chance. And then he did it. And it's wonderful. But that's not what the movie is about. It's just a scene that works perfectly well if you've never seen Jaws, but is even more entertaining when you realize its rhythms. It's like the moment in Nope where it's like, yep, we're doing this. You really feel the creative inspiration. You are watching someone else open their heart and show you how much they love Jaws, which is what I do on a daily basis, which is what Paul does, which is why we're friends now, which is why my house is decorated this way.
Well, even having this conversation, like, it's just so exciting to talk to somebody that loves that movie and also just has a respect for genre filmmaking, because genre is obviously sometimes looked down upon. And, like if you're introduced to it early on, there is this true feeling of, connectivity to the movies that, whether it be Jaws or the classic Universal monster movies. I grew up in a time where, I was going to the store and renting the worst videos ever, a lot of the full moon movies, but I love them because of the video zone stuff and the behind the scenes features, and like you get an understanding of like, well, horror, and Martin Scorsese's talked about this, like horror movies and genre filmmaking is like the basis of narrative storytelling, and if you don't love that, then you don't love movies.
Yeah, well, the fables you hear as a kid, right? Because you're a child, you imagine them as much more terrifying. You're making your own horror movies before you're ever making comedies or dramas. In your head, in your mind. And the other thing too is that we have reached a point now, I think it's what you were alluding to with genre saturation, where people are now using the rules of genre cinema or the language of genre cinema to tell ordinary stories or conventional stories, dramas and comedies, with a slight edge of something else. I programmed some stuff at TIFF last year, a couple of movies, Do I Know You From Somewhere and You Are Not Alone, which use the structure and elements of, one is hard science fiction and one is more fanciful, but they are not telling sci-fi stories. They are telling stories about people in crisis or people experiencing a discovery about themselves and their own lives that changes them. And the sci-fi stuff is just a way to get people in the room, because we all know what that movie looks like. But what if you played it out as an ordinary experience with minimal special effects? What if you put the shark off screen? What if you do something that isn't specific and blatant in its genre and just use the language to make people understand that they're seeing something bigger? In a way, Under the Skin does that.
Yes.
But it's also hard sci-fi. Like it's leaning on the Kubrickian aspects of certain scenes and the realism of other scenes in a really interesting way. But it is using your understanding or your expectations of what you would get in a movie like that to give you something completely different. And Jaws is its own sort of weird bait and switch. It's not, because it's completely upfront about what kind of a movie it is. It's just that it felt like a bait and switch at the time because they couldn't show the shark. And now when you watch it, you're expecting this great, big, scary adventure movie, and you get it, but you don't get it the way you think you will. And I really do think that was the first time that happened, other than, no budget movies where the invasion happens outside the building because they can't afford to shoot it. Jaws gives you the shark, but not the way you want it, or not the way you think you want it. And in the end, it's the only way it could work.
Absolutely. Well, I want to kind of segue a little bit before wrapping up with you, because, we're already halfway through the year. Has there been any films that have really stood out to you that you would recommend to people watching or even listening to the show?
Oh, I have to admit, I haven't been seeing as much as I used to. This last few months, I've been doing some other work that hasn't made it possible to spend as much time in the theaters. I still haven't seen Sinners, for which I am kicking myself because I'm dying to.
That's a sin in itself,
I
especially because
know,
I
I
mean,
know.
like I love Fright Night is one of my favorite movies of all time, and there are so many little nods to that in that movie. And obviously, people talk about the Faculty and From Dusk Till Dawn as being a big inspiration, but you can see how much Ryan Coogler loves Fright Night.
See, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. This is something that I really love about the modern age of not hit makers exactly, but people who have reached a point where they can command enough studio money to make the movie they want to make. They're going to make the weird thing. They're going to take their shot, and it's going to be something. It may not succeed for everyone, and it may not succeed at all. I just caught up to Mickey 17, which is so bananas that I love the fact that Bong Joon-ho used his carte blanche from Parasite winning all the Oscars to say, I want to do this next, and I want to have Robert Pattinson play, oh, I don't know, one of him is Marlon Brando, and the other one is Bugs Bunny, and pull it off. And I don't know that it works all the way through, but I love it. That's one
Absolutely.
that I
You
can
even
happily
mentioned
recommend.
that in your Shiny Things article where you compared it to Better Man, where like the alternate personality.
Yeah, well, they came out the same week. I had to come up with something, but that has always been ever since I was writing that video column for the Star in the '90s. That's always been the challenge. Like you see what the calendar holds, and you got to run with it. And sometimes something presents itself, and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, no, Mickey 17 was a highlight. Andor, honestly, I know it's a small screen thing, but it's a movie. Like it's 4 movies, and you want to talk about people putting intention and real world relevance into a genre project. I don't think I've ever seen anything that's worked as well as that does.
And Tony Gilroy just being very open about not being a Star Wars fan from the very beginning and talking like on Brian Koppelman's podcast about how when he was brought in to do reshoots for Rogue One, he was approaching it as a Battle of Britain movie and not
Mm-hmm.
simply like a Star Wars film. And like this franchise, like episode 10 of Andor with Stellan Skarsgård and Elizabeth Dulo, like that episode wrecked me. And I was not expecting it to have that power. And especially with Elizabeth Dulo's character, who in season 1 has kind of been, in the background for the most part. But the way that that character is brought into this, season, especially in the back half, it's so impactful. And you really appreciate, Gilroy as a writer and as a, showrunner. I mean, he's been doing it since, officially since Cutting Edge, but like his, career is just amazing. Like even something like Beirut, like I think is really underrated as a writer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he is a. I'm trying to come up with a phrase here that doesn't sound reductive, but his ability to use intention and texture to not just tell a story but present a point of view. For me, it was the Gorman Massacre episode, the episode 8, I guess, where you are dreading what's going to happen from the start of the episode, and then he gives it to you halfway through instead of at the end or holding it off for the next one, and just realizes he could pull out the suspense, but the outrage is so much more important. So let's go for that and make you feel this thing rather than appreciate it as, oh, what a clever metaphor for oppression and the way that empires will inevitably turn on the people that they care least about because they can. And then to just throw that, well, he doesn't throw it away, it's the entire second half of the episode, but to throw away certain character beats and just say, well, that also happens because this is more important. We're going here, we're going in this direction to make the larger point and let the smaller points stand for themselves. It's incredible. I really need to watch Michael Clayton again. It's right over there. I feel it's been forever, and it's like now I want to see how much I missed the first time because I was not terribly I liked it, but I didn't see what everybody else saw, and now I wonder if it'll be there.
And that was such a good year as well, 2007, just in terms of, the films and things like that. But yeah, it makes me even want to go back to watch some of his like Duplicity. Like I almost feel like that's something where like I know, but
Baby,
I didn't
do I
love it
have
the
that?
first time, but it's almost like a force feed now because of Andor. Another movie that I really loved wholeheartedly, but I feel like I will like most of his stuff anyways, is David Cronenberg's The Shrouds. I felt like that's a
Yeah,
movie that
that's true.
connected on
That
a
was this year,
very
wasn't it?
emotional level, but also is still extremely funny. And that's something that you've brought up on someone else's movie many times, is that Cronenberg is an extremely funny filmmaker. There's a bit that almost seems like it's out of the Three Stooges in the background of the cemetery where they're exhuming a body and they're trying to like move it around. And like just like that sense of humor that Cronenberg has is so charming in a weird way that it's hard to describe.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a really mordant wit that runs through a lot of his early stuff, especially Dead Zone, where Walken is constantly sort of like, well, he laughs about how you could never get away clean if you killed Hitler. There's a little kind of a resignation to his character arc that is also slightly funny if it wasn't so incredibly tragic. But then you realize he's laughing to keep from crying, which is, again, the thing that Cronenberg does so beautifully. The Fly has that wonderful first third of the courtship between Brundle and Ronnie, where Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis, who were a real couple at the time, just get to be charismatic and magnetic and flirty and funny. And it really is a tragedy that romance is torpedoed by the rest of the movie and that she stays with him and it becomes so horrible. Well, he said that was his allegory. It was his way of confronting his father's death from cancer. And The Shrouds is about the loss of his wife and how throwing yourself into work after a tragedy like that won't save you, which is the saddest thing I can ever think of from David Cronenberg. And we had a Q&A after he and I had a conversation after the second screening at TIFF last year. And it's like the half hour that I will treasure until the day I die, where at least I can get there and talk to him like a person about the real pain and sadness in his films, which no one ever gives him credit for. He's also a phenomenal director of actors. Nobody ever talks about that.
Yes, absolutely. Like that's the thing with
The
him,
Shrouds.
though.
Yeah, I also. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say, like you look at the performances in The Shrouds. Like, obviously, Guy Pearce was great in The Brutalist last year, but he is phenomenal in this movie. Like, Vincent Cassel is so like soulful in a way that I haven't seen him before. And obviously, like he's great in Eastern Promises and probably the best thing in A Dangerous Method. But the way that he subverts expectations, or even someone like Roy Scheider in Naked Lunch, like he takes actors that you're familiar with and turns them on their head in a certain way, and you get to see them in a new and exciting fashion that you haven't before, which is always, again, like Spielberg with actors. I think because they're known for a specific thing, they don't get that credit for, the collaboration process.
Yeah. Well, I think Cronenberg's strength, and you could maybe apply this to Spielberg as well, in the way that he worked with young actors early in their careers over the course of his career. He's made stars of people fairly frequently. But Cronenberg gets what I would argue are the definitive performances from certain actors and then establishes them for that. Like Walken, when you think of Christopher Walken, it's The Dead Zone and everything that followed. The stuff he did before that was terrific. He's always been a great actor, but people kept trying to fit him into a box that he didn't want to belong in. And Cronenberg saw that eccentricity in his line readings and gave him a context to be unpredictable and panicky and weird. And he rose to it beautifully. Jeff Goldblum, I don't think you see the rest of his career without the showcase of The Fly.
Well, especially with Ian Malcolm, right? In Jurassic Park. Like, it feels like Seth Brundle,
straight
you
line.
need him in order to get to that point. Or even Viggo Mortensen, like after The Lord of the Rings, for him to get to play, obviously like Reflecting Skin, he's great in, but like there's a part of it where it's like A History of Violence, shows him in two different roles in a way that he hadn't been shown before. And that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, Cronenberg can consistently find I think he casts to unlock something, and he finds something in people that maybe they wouldn't have been willing to do with another director who didn't pay as much attention or work as closely with them. But he's remarkable. And I did forget that The Shrouds technically opened this year, because we had it in September, and that was sort of the totality of my experience of it. But yeah, it opened in September, and then it opened theatrically in April, and I'm not going to say it's his masterpiece, because it's not, but it's in conversation with his masterpieces in a really interesting way. Like there's a lot of Videodrome and Naked Lunch in there, even though it's technically more of a real world kind of experience, but it gets there by the end. And I wanted to give him a big hug afterwards, which was the first time I've had that experience of a David Cronenberg movie. It's like, are you okay? And the answer is probably not, but this is how he's dealing with it.
And I got to interview him for The Shrouds as well, and this is like the first time I've ever talked to him. It felt like he's been more open than ever to be just like honest about how he feels about it. Like even when I was talking to him about Existence and the Vinegar Syndrome release of it, he said, "Oh, I have no interest in, my old movies other than I'll just sign, a form saying like I consent to this getting a transfer, and that's it." And I was really kind of surprised by that.
I get it though. I mean, if you were an artist in your 80s, would you really want to look back when you were younger, lither, faster? People say they watch their movies and they think about what they ate that day or what fights they had off set. If you're Cronenberg and you're watching your studio work, I don't know. I know it's not always easy for him to get pictures made these days. He might just be thinking about that. I don't think he particularly wants to reevaluate the person he was because he's constantly evolving, which is why it surprised me to find out that Crimes of the Future was a 25-year-old script or a 20-year-old script that he dusted off and made, because it felt like a commentary. It felt fresh and engaged. But of course, that's the difference between when he wrote it and when he made it. There's an evolution, and that has to be accounted for. But yeah, he's a guy he's a shark. He's always moving forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, Crimes of the Future as well, like you just touched on it. Like I feel like almost like it's a conversation with his old self and where he is now, because there was a time where Cronenberg, especially in Ontario, was looked down upon. He was evicted, he was threatened with arrest, and now at this point in his career, the person that is the performance artist in Viggo Mortensen's character is now celebrated and ogled, and in the way that we talk about David Cronenberg. Like we even use the word Cronenbergian to describe things, and it's just fascinating to see how time changes people's opinions of individuals and artists, because once he was considered reprehensible, and now he's one of the finest filmmakers to ever work in the field.
Yeah, he just outlasted the critics. Like he kept delivering. He kept making the work he'd always made. He didn't worry about how it would be received. And then eventually they caught up. Everybody, well, not all the critics, some of them died. He's been working for 60 years. But he's been embraced by generation after generation because he is making relevant, interesting work. Like the critics in that case, the naysayers were wrong. And it's always easy to point at something that's new and scary and say that's new and scary and I don't like it. But maybe look at why it's new, and new is obvious, but maybe look at why it's scary and you discover something. And Cronenberg has been talking about, extreme exaggerated versions of real things for his entire career. Videodrome, my God, Videodrome is about social media. It just happened to be made 30 years before social media was a problem.
Well, even reality TV, right? Like it predicted all of these things, and even like YouTube, like it feels it's still relevant, and that's scary.
Yeah, I introduced that when Cinematheque had its Toronto on Screen series, I guess, in 2009, tied to Jeff Pavere's very good book about how Toronto is a location that can be almost anything because it's constantly being used for Americans, and therefore it's slippery. It was me and Adam Naiman. We stepped up before Cronenberg. He was there to speak as well. And Adam spoke and I spoke. And I made that pitch, like, this is the film that predicts the future. It just gets all the details wrong. But if you look at it, you'll see this and this and this and this. And Cronenberg comes out and goes, I don't know why he said that. I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff. And it's self-effacing and probably true, but that's how an artist works. Like, you see the future without understanding that it's the future. The Brood is his divorce movie, right? Like, he joked that it came out the same year as Kramer vs. Kramer for a reason. But it is a film about a messy divorce and how the rage that you carry for someone you used to love comes out in horrible ways. Scanners is the more commercial project, but it's still about needing a father figure to shape you into a decent person and what we become without good parents. Videodrome is Videodrome, which is a scream of terror in what the world is about to become. And then you get to the more reasonable films. Dead Zone's a Stephen King adaptation, but it's still about loss, tragedy, suffering, martyrdom, assassination. The Fly is about cancer. It was seen as an AIDS allegory because he gets weird after the characters are affected. First they have sex, then the tragedy comes. But it's not. Like John Carpenter's The Thing is the AIDS movie. It doesn't know it is, but it absolutely is. That was in the air when they made the movie, and that's what the film is now about. But all of Cronenberg's films rolling forward are examinations of a human condition that he himself doesn't understand, that he makes the movies to understand it. And so, you see something like The Spoils and Crimes of the Future too, where he turns the lens on himself. Of course they're going to be more meaningful.
Absolutely. Well, Norm, I've taken up way too much of your time, and I really
I
do
could
appreciate.
go on.
I know. Well, even like talking about The Fly again, like I remember talking to Sean Baker because he said like he mentioned David Cronenberg in his speech at Cannes, and I was really kind of curious about that, and because I felt like the end of Honora felt almost like The Fly, where it's this guttural moment where it punches you in the stomach and it just leaves you there sitting in the seat, feeling both
Yeah.
completely miserable and sad for what Annie's gone through, but also where like your Borisov felt very much almost like, or even like the three henchmen feel very much like John Getz, where in any other movie they would be one dimensional, but through the course of the film, they have their own arcs and their own interior life that feels very present, and you actually get to know them as people. And like John
Yeah.
Getz in that movie, like turns to be not he's not a great person, but there is still some empathy in him, and there's some
Yeah.
caring aspects for him, and looking at Gina Davis's character. So there's a
Yeah.
lot there with Cronenberg in terms of, I mean, this could just be a Cronenberg podcast now, but like it's amazing that watching The Shrouds that he still can make something that poignant and meaningful, and still, like you're saying, like it's an evolution. Like it doesn't feel like he's backtracking in any way.
No, I think he only knows how to move forward. And, I'm glad he doesn't do sequels or entertain them. I'm glad he has the trajectory he has, even if he doesn't necessarily think it's like the best use of his talents to not make a movie for 6 years and wait for the financing to come together for something else. But I know he's enjoying this period of getting people to laugh finally, like making jokes on stage and being the elder statesman. He wears it really well and he's earned it. So yeah, I'm perfectly happy to watch him be happy and contented and show up in Star Trek Discovery somehow.
Or Ready or Not too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I have to admit.
Yeah, I mean, when it was announced, it's like Sarah Michelle Gellar and David Cronenberg is like, oh, '90s kid me would like be obsessed with this.
Yeah, I'd be like, you can do that? You can put them in the same room? It's not a time cop thing where they cancel each other out?
Oh man, it's yeah, it's wonderful. But Norm, it's just always great talking to you about movies. Like honestly, the depth and knowledge that you have, and just like listening to you, it's wonderful. So thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you for, like pulling my string and letting me talk about my favorite movie in the world.
I mean, it is truly like the greatest film ever. Like I honestly had the only interest ever before my obsession with film was marine biology.
Oh,
I was
well.
I loved National Geographics, and there was this Dudley Moore voiced series in the '90s. But then as soon as I saw Jaws, I became afraid of everything to do with the water, but then obsessed with the film in the way that Spielberg does with The Greatest Show on Earth. So
We never have a choice in what we get it to be.
no, we don't.
I think that's a big lesson from Spielberg's films as well. Destiny is, character is destiny or the other way around. I'm not totally sure. But yeah, I used to hate the water.
Yeah, drowning.